Don't forget to subscribe. Afterwards, the wisest and most spiritual books from the greatest authors await you every day. And now buckle up, sit back and we'll begin. Herodotus. The History of Herodotus. Melpomene. The Agathyrsians are the most luxurious of men and wear gold ornaments for the most part. Also, they have promiscuous intercourse with their women, in order that they may be brethren to one another, and being all nearly related, may not feel envy or malice one against another. In their other customs they have come to resemble the Thracians. The Neuroi practiced the Scythian customs, and one generation before the expedition of Darius it so befell them that they were forced to quit their land altogether by reason of serpents. For their land produced serpents in vast numbers, and they fell upon them in still larger numbers from the desert country above their borders, until at last, being hard pressed, they left their own land and settled among the Butanoi. These men, it would seem, are wizards, for it is said of them by the Scythians and by the Hellenes, who are settled in the Scythian land, that once in every year each of the Neuroi becomes a wolf for a few days, and then returns again to his original form. For my part, I do not believe them when they say this, but they say it nevertheless, and swear it moreover. The Androphagoi have the most savage manners of all human beings, and they neither acknowledge any rule of right nor observe any customary law. They are nomads and wear clothing like that of the Scythians, but have a language of their own, and alone of all these nations they are man-eaters. The Melanchlaenoi wear all of them black clothing, whence also they have their name, and they practice the customs of the Scythians. The Butanoi are a very great and numerous race, and are all very blue-eyed and fair of skin. And in their land is built a city of wood, the name of which is Gelonos, and each side of the wall is 30 furlongs in length and lofty at the same time, all being of wood. And the houses are of wood also in the temples, for there are in it temples of Hellenic gods furnished after Hellenic fashion with sacred images and altars and cells. All of wood, and they keep festivals every other year to Dionysos and celebrate the rites of Bacchus. For the Gelonians are originally Hellenes, and they removed from the trading stations on the coast and settled among the Butanoi, and they use partly the Scythian language and partly the Hellenic. The Butanoi, however, do not use the same language as the Gelonians, nor is their manner of living the same. For the Butanoi are natives of the soil and a nomad people, and alone of the nations in these parts feed on fir cones, but the Gelonians are tillers of the ground and feed on corn and have gardens, and resemble them not at all either in appearance or in complexion of skin. However, by the Hellenes the Butanoi also are called Gelonians, not being rightly so called. Their land is all thickly overgrown with forests of all kinds of trees, and in the thickest forest there is a large and deep lake, and round it marshy ground and reeds. In this are caught otters and beavers and certainly other wild animals with square-shaped faces. The fur of these is sewn as a fringe round their coats of skin, and the testicles are made use of by them for curing diseases of the womb. About the Sauromatae the following tale is told. When the Hellenes had fought with the Amazons, now the Amazons are called by the Scythians Oirpata, which name means in the Hellenic tongue slayers of men, for man they call Oir, and Pata means to slay them. As the story goes, the Hellenes, having conquered them in the battle at the Thermodon, were sailing away and conveying with them in 3 ships as many Amazons as they were able to take prisoners. These in the open sea set upon the men and cast them out of the ships, but they knew nothing about ships, nor how to use rudders or sails or oars, And after they had cast out the men, they were driven about by wave and wind, and came to that part of the Maeotian lake where Kremnoi stands. Now Kremnoi is in the land of the free Scythians. There the Amazons disembarked from their ships and made their way into the country, and having met first with a troop of horses feeding, they seized them, and mounted upon these they plundered the property of the Scythians. The Scythians meanwhile were not able to understand the matter, for they did not know either their speech or their dress or the race to which they belonged, but were in wonder as to whence they had come, and thought that they were men of an age corresponding to their appearance. And finally they fought a battle against them, and after the battle the Scythians got possession of the bodies of the dead. And thus they discovered that they were women. They took counsel therefore and resolved by no means to go on trying to kill them, but to send against them the youngest men from among themselves, making conjecture of the number, so as to send just as many men as there were women. These were told to encamp near them, and do whatsoever they should do. If however the women should come after them, they were not to fight, but to retire before them, and when the women stopped, they were to approach near and encamp. This plan was adopted by the Scythians because they desired to have children born from them. The young men accordingly were sent out and did that which had been commanded them. And when the Amazons perceived that they had not come to do them any harm, they let them alone, and the two camps approached nearer to one another every day. And the young men, like the Amazons, had nothing except their arms and their horses, and got their living, as the Amazons did, by hunting and by taking booty. Now the Amazons at midday used to scatter abroad either one by one or by two together, dispersing to a distance from one another to ease themselves, and the Scythians also having perceived this did the same thing. And one of the Scythians came near to one of those Amazons who were apart by themselves, and she did not repulse him, but allowed him to lie with her. And she could not speak to him, for they did not understand one another's speech, but she made signs to him with her hand to come on the following day to the same place, and to bring another with him, signifying to him that there should be two of them, and that she would bring another with her. The young man therefore, when he returned, reported this to the others, and on the next day he came himself to the place and also brought another, and he found the Amazon awaiting him with another in her company. Then hearing this, the rest of the young men also in their turn tamed for themselves the remainder of the Amazons, and after this they joined their camps and lived together, each man having for his wife her with whom he had had dealings at first. And the men were not able to learn the speech of the women, but the women came to comprehend that of the men. So when they understood one another, the men spoke to the Amazons as follows: "We have parents and we have possessions. Now therefore let us no longer lead a life of this kind, but let us go away to the main body of our people and dwell with them, and we will have you for wives and no others." They however spoke thus in reply: "We should not be able to live with your women, for we and they have not the same customs. We shoot with bows and hurl javelins and ride horses, but the works of women we never learned, whereas your women do none of these things which we said, but stay in the wagons and work at the works of women, neither going out to the chase nor anywhither else. We therefore should not be able to live in agreement with them. But if ye desire to keep us for your wives and to be thought honest men, go to your parents and obtain from them your share of the goods, and then let us go and dwell by ourselves." The young men agreed and did this, and when they had obtained the share of the goods which belonged to them and had returned back to the Amazons, The women spoke to them as follows. We are possessed by fear and trembling to think that we must dwell in this place, having not only separated you from your fathers, but also done great damage to your land. Since then ye think it right to have us as your wives, do this together with us come, and let us remove from this land and pass over the river Tanais, and there dwell. The young men agreed to this also, and they crossed over the Tanais, and made their way towards the rising sun for 3 days' journey from Tanais, and also towards the north wind for 3 days' journey from the Maeotian lake. And having arrived at the place where they are now settled, they took up their abode there. And from thenceforward the women of the Sauramatai practiced their ancient way of living, going out regularly on horseback to the chase both in company with the men and apart from them, and going regularly to war, and wearing the same dress as the men. And the Sauramatai make use of the Scythian tongue, speaking it barbarously however from the first, since the Amazons did not learn it thoroughly well. As regards marriages their rule is this, that no maiden is married until she has slain a man of their enemies, and some of them even grow old and die before they are married, because they are not able to fulfill the requirement of the law. To the kings of these nations then, which have been mentioned in order, the messengers of the Scythians came, finding them gathered together, and spoke declaring to them how the Persian king, after having subdued all things to himself in the other continent, had laid a bridge over the neck of the Bosphorus, and had crossed over to that continent, and having crossed over and subdued the Thracians, was making a bridge over the river Ister, desiring to bring under his power all these regions also. Do ye therefore, they said, by no means stand aloof and allow us to be destroyed, but let us become all of one mind and oppose him who is coming against us. If ye shall not do so, we on our part shall either be forced by necessity to leave our land, or we shall stay in it and make a treaty with the invader, for what else can we do if ye are not willing to help us? And for you after this it will be in no respect easier, for the Persian has come not at all less against you than against us, nor will it content him to subdue us and abstain from you. And of the truth of that which we say we will mention a strong evidence. If the Persian had been making his expedition against us alone, because he desired to take vengeance for the former servitude, he ought to have abstained from all the rest, and to have come at once to invade our land, and he would thus have made it clear to all that he was marching to fight against the Scythians, and not against the rest. In fact, however, ever since he crossed over to this continent, he has compelled all who came in his way to submit to him, and he holds under him now not only the other Thracians, but also the Getae, who are our nearest neighbors. When the Scythians proposed this, the kings who had come from the various nations took counsel together, and their opinions were divided. The kings of the Gelonians, of the Budanoi and of the Sauramatai agreed together and accepted the proposal that they should help the Scythians, but those of the Agathyrsians, Neuroi, Androphagoi, Melanclainoi and Tauroi, returned answer to the Scythians as follows. If ye had not been the first to do wrong to the Persians and to begin war, then we should have surely thought that ye were speaking justly in asking for those things for which ye now ask, and we should have yielded to your request and shared your fortunes. As it is, however, ye on the one hand made invasion without us into their land, and bear rule over the Persians for so long a time as God permitted you, and they in their turn, since the same God stirs them up, are repaying you with the like. As for us, however, neither at that time did we do any wrong to these men, nor now shall we attempt to do any wrong to them unprovoked. If however the Persians shall come against our land also, and do wrong first to us, we also shall refuse to submit. But until we shall see this, we shall remain by ourselves, for we are of opinion that the Persians have come not against us, but against those who were the authors of the wrong." When the Scythians heard this answer reported, they planned not to fight a pitched battle openly, since these did not join them as allies, but to retire before the Persians and to drive away their cattle from before them, choking up with earth the wells and the springs of water by which they passed and destroying the grass from off the ground. Having parted themselves for this into two bodies, and they resolved that the Sauramatai should be added to one of their divisions, namely that over which Scapasus was king, and that these should move on, if the Persians turned in that direction, straight towards the river Tanais, retreating before him by the shore of the Maeotian lake, and when the Persian marched back again, they should come after and pursue him. This was one division of their kingdom, appointed to go by the way which has been said, and the other two of the kingdoms, the large one over which Idanthersos was king, and the third of which Taxacus was king, were to join together in one, with the Gelonians and the Butanoi added to them, and they also were to retire before the Persians, 1 day's march in front of them, going on out of their way, and doing that which had been planned. First they were to move on straight for the countries which had refused to give their alliance, in order that they might involve these also in the war, and though these had not voluntarily undertaken the war with the Persians, they were to involve them in it nevertheless against their will, and after that they were to return to their own land and attack the enemy, if it should seem good to them in council so to do. Having formed this plan, the Scythians went to meet the army of Darius, sending off the best of their horsemen before them as scouts, but all the wagons in which their children and their women lived they sent on, and with them all their cattle, leaving only so much as was sufficient to supply them with food, and charged them that they should proceed continually towards the north wind. These, I say, were being carried on before. But when the scouts who went in front of the Scythians discovered the Persians distant about 3 days' march from Istar, then the Scythians, having discovered them, continued to pitch their camp 1 day's march in front, destroying utterly that which grew from the ground. And when the Persians saw that the horsemen of the Scythians had made their appearance, they came after them following in their track, while the Scythians continually moved on. After this, since they had directed their march towards the first of the divisions, the Persians continued to pursue towards the east and the river Tanais, and when the Scythians crossed over the river Tanais, the Persians crossed over after them and continued still to pursue, until they had passed quite through the land of the Sauramatai, and had come to that of the Butanoi. Now so long as the Persians were passing through Scythia and the land of the Sauramatai, they had nothing to destroy, seeing that the land was bare, but when they invaded the land of the Butanoi, then they fell in with the wooden wall, which had been deserted by the Butanoi and left wholly unoccupied, and this they destroyed by fire. Having done so, they continued to follow on further in the tracks of the enemy, until they had passed through the whole of this land and had arrived at the desert. This desert region is occupied by no men, and it lies above the land of the Butanoi, extending for a 7 days' journey, and above this desert dwell the Thessagitai, and 4 large rivers flow from them through the land of the Maeotians, and run into that which is called the Maeotian lake, their names being as follows: Lycos, Oros, Tanais, Sergus. When therefore Darius came to the desert region, he ceased from his course and halted his army upon the river Oros. Having so done, he began to build 8 large fortifications at equal distances from one another, that is to say about 60 furlongs, of which the ruins still existed down to my time. And while he was occupied in this, the Scythians whom he was pursuing came round by the upper parts and returned back to Scythia. Accordingly, since these had altogether disappeared and were no longer seen by the Persians at all, Darius left those fortifications half finished, and turning back himself began to go towards the west, supposing that these were the whole body of the Scythians, and that they were flying towards the west. And marching his army as quickly as possible, when he came to Scythia, he met with the 2 divisions of the Scythians together, and having fallen in with these he continued to pursue them, while they retired out of his way 1 day's journey in advance. And as Darius did not cease to come after them, the Scythians, according to the plan which they had made, continued to retire before him towards the land of those who had refused to give their alliance, and first towards that of the Melanchlaenoi. And when Scythians and Persians both together had invaded and disturbed these, the Scythians led the way to the country of the Androphagoi, and when these had also been disturbed, they proceeded to the land of the Neuroi, and while these 2 were being disturbed, the Scythians went on retiring before the enemy to the Agathyrsians. The Agathyrsians, however, seeing that their next neighbors also were flying from the Scythians and had been disturbed, sent a herald before the Scythians invaded their land, and proclaimed to the Scythians not to set foot upon their confines, warning them that if they should attempt to invade the country, they would first have to fight with them. The Agathyrsians then, having given this warning, came out in arms to their borders, meaning to drive off those who were coming upon them. But the Melanchlaenoi and Androphagoi and Neuroi, when the Persians and Scythians together invaded them, did not betook themselves to brave defense, but forgot their former threat, and fled in confusion ever further towards the north to the desert region. The Scythians, however, when the Agathyrsians had warned them off, did not attempt any more to come to these, but led the Persians from the country of the Neuroi back to their own land. Now as this went on for a long time and did not cease, Darius sent a horseman to Idanthyrsos, king of the Scythians, and said as follows: "Thou most wondrous man, why dost thou fly forever, when thou mightest do of these 2 things one? If thou thinkest thyself able to make opposition to my power, stand thou still and cease from wandering abroad, and fight. But if thou dost acknowledge thyself too weak, cease then in that case also from thy course, and come to speech with thy master, bringing to him gifts of earth and water." To this the king of the Scythians Idanthyrsos made answer thus: "My case, O Persian, stands thus. Never yet did I fly because I was afraid, either before this time from any other man, or now from thee, nor have I done anything different now from that which I was wont to do also in time of peace. And as to the cause why I do not fight with thee at once, this also I will declare to thee. We have neither cities nor lands sown with crops, about which we should fear lest they should be captured or laid waste, and so join battle more speedily with you. But if it be necessary by all means to come to this speedily, know that we have sepulchres in which our fathers are buried. Therefore come now, find out these and attempt to destroy them. And ye shall know then whether we shall fight with you for the sepulchres or whether we shall not fight. Before that, however, unless the motion comes upon us, we shall not join battle with thee. About fighting let so much as has been said suffice, but as to masters, I acknowledge none over me, but Zeus my ancestor and Hestia the queen of the Scythians. To thee then in place of gifts of earth and water, I shall send such things as it is fitting that thou shouldest receive, and in return for thy saying that thou art my master, for that I say, woe betide thee. This is the proverbial saying of the Scythians. The herald then had departed to report this to Darius, and the kings of the Scythians, having heard mention of subjection to a master, were filled with wrath. They sent accordingly the division which was appointed to be joined with the Sauromatite, that division of which Scapasus was in command, bidding them come to speech with the Ionians, namely those who were guarding the bridge of the Ister, and meanwhile they who were left behind, resolved not to lead the Persians wandering about any more, but to attack them constantly as they were getting provisions. Therefore they observed the soldiers of Darius as they got provisions, and did that which they had determined. And the cavalry of the Scythians always routed that of the enemy, but the Persian horsemen as they fled, fell back upon the men on foot, and these would come up to their assistance, and meanwhile the Scythians when they had driven in the cavalry turned back, fearing the men on foot. Also by night the Scythians used to make similar attacks. And the thing which, strange to say, most helped the Persians and hindered the Scythians in their attacks upon the camp of Darius, I will mention, namely the voice of the asses and the appearance of the mules, for Scythia produces neither ass nor mule, as I have declared before, nor is there of all in the Scythian country, either ass or mule on account of the cold. The asses accordingly by riotously braying used to throw into confusion the cavalry of the Scythians, and often, as they were in the middle of riding against the Persians, when the horses heard the voice of the asses, they turned back in confusion and were possessed with wonder, pricking up their ears, because they had never heard such a voice, nor seen the form of the creature before. So far then the Persians had the advantage for a small part of the war. But the Scythians, whenever they saw that the Persians were disquieted, then in order that they might remain a longer time in Scythia and in remaining might suffer by being in want of everything, would leave some of their own cattle behind with the herdsmen, while they themselves rode out of the way to another place, and the Persians would come upon the cattle and take them, and having taken them they were elated at what they had done. As this happened often, at length Darius began to be in straits, and the kings of the Scythians perceiving this sent a herald bearing as gifts to Darius a bird and a mouse and a frog and 5 arrows. The Persians accordingly asked the bearer of the gifts as to the meaning of the gifts which were offered, but he said that nothing more had been commanded to him, but to give them and get away as speedily as possible, and he bade the Persians find out for themselves, if they had wisdom, that which the gifts were meant to express. Having heard this the Persians took counsel with one another, and the opinion of Darius was that the Scythians were giving to him both themselves and also earth and water, making his conjecture by this, namely that a mouse is produced in the earth, and feeds on the same produce of the earth as man, and a frog in the water. While a bird has great resemblance to a horse, and moreover that in giving the arrows they were delivering up their own might in battle. This was the opinion expressed by Darius, but the opinion of Gobryas, one of the 7 men who killed the Magian, was at variance with it, for he conjectured that the gifts expressed this: unless ye become birds and fly up into the heaven, O Persians, or become mice and sink down under the earth, or become frogs and leap into the lakes, ye shall not return back home, but shall be smitten by these arrows. The Persians then, I say, were making conjecture of the gifts. And meanwhile the single division of the Scythians, that which had been appointed at first to keep guard along the Maeotian lake, and then to go to the Ister and come to speech with the Ionians, when they arrived at the bridge spoke as follows. Ionians, we have come bringing you freedom. If at least ye are willing to listen to us, for we are informed that Darius gave you command to guard the bridge for 60 days only, and then, if he had not arrived within that time, to get you away to your own land. Now therefore, if ye do as we say, ye will be without blame from his part, and without blame also from ours. Stay the appointed days, and then after that get you away. They then, when the Ionians had engaged themselves to do this, hastened back again by the quickest way. And meanwhile, after the coming of the gifts to Darius, the Scythians who were left had arrayed themselves against the Persians with both foot and horse, meaning to engage battle. Now when the Scythians had been placed in battle array, a hare darted through them into the space between the two armies, and each company of them, as they saw the hare, began to run after it. When the Scythians were thus thrown into disorder and were raising loud cries, Darius asked what was this clamor arising from the enemy, and hearing that they were running after the hare, he said to those men to whom he was wont to say things at other times, "These men have very slight regard for us, and I perceive now that Gobryas spoke rightly about the Scythian gifts. Seeing then that now I myself too think that things are so, we have need of good counsel, in order that our retreat homewards may be safely made." To this replied Gobryas and said, "O king, even by report I was almost assured of the difficulty of dealing with these men, and when I came I learnt it still more thoroughly, since I saw that they were mocking us. Now therefore my opinion is, that as soon as night comes on, we kindle the campfires as we are wont to do at other times also, and deceive with a false tale those of our men who are weakest to endure hardships, and tie up all the asses and get us away, before either the Scythians make for the Ister to destroy the bridge or something be resolved by the Ionians, which may be our ruin." Thus Gobryas advised, and after this, when night came on, Darius acted on this opinion. Those of his men who were weakened by fatigue and whose loss was of least account, these he left behind in the camp, and the asses also tied up. And for the following reasons he left behind the asses and the weaker men of his army the asses in order that they might make a noise which should be heard, and the men really because of their weakness. But on a pretense stated openly that he was about to attack the Scythians with the effective part of the army, and that they meanwhile were to be defenders of the camp. Having thus instructed those who were left behind, and having kindled campfires, Darius hastened by the quickest way towards the Ister. And the asses, having no longer about them the usual throng, very much more for that reason caused their voice to be heard, so the Scythians, hearing the asses, supposed surely that the Persians were remaining in their former place. But when it was day, those who were left behind perceived that they had been betrayed by Darius, and they held out their hands in submission to the Scythians, telling them what their case was, and the Scythians, when they heard this, joined together as quickly as possible, that is to say the two combined divisions of the Scythians in the single division, and also the Sauromatite, Butanoi, and Gelonians, and began to pursue the Persians, making straight for the Ister. But as the Persian army for the most part consisted of men on foot, and was not acquainted with the roads not being marked with tracks, while the Scythian army consisted of horsemen and was acquainted with the shortest cuts along the way, they missed one another, and the Scythians arrived at the bridge much before the Persians. Then, having learnt that the Persians had not yet arrived, they said to the Ionians who were in the ships, "Ionians, the days of your number are past, and ye are not acting uprightly, and that ye yet remain waiting. But as ye stayed before from fear, so now break up the passage as quickly as ye may, and depart free and unhurt, feeling thankfulness both to the gods and to the Scythians. And him who was formerly your master we will so convince that he shall never again march with an army upon any nation." Upon this the Ionians took counsel together, and Miltiades the Athenian on the one hand, who was commander and despot of the men of the Chersonese in Hellespont, was of opinion that they should follow the advice of the Scythians and set Ionia free. But Histaios the Milesian was of the opposite opinion to this, for he said that at the present time it was by means of Darius that each one of them was ruling as despot over a city, and if the power of Darius should be destroyed, neither he himself would be able to bear rule over the Milesians, nor would any other of them be able to bear rule over any other city, for each of the cities would choose to have popular rather than despotic rule. When Histaios declared his opinion thus, forthwith all turned to this opinion, whereas at the first they were adopting that of Miltiades. Now these were they who gave the vote between the two opinions, and were men of consequence in the eyes of the king. First the despots of the Hellespontians, Daphnis of Abydos, Hippoclos of Lampsacos, Hierophantos of Parian, Metrodoros of Proconnesos, Aristagoras of Kyzikos, and Ariston of Byzantium. These were those from the Hellespont, and from Ionia, Stratus of Chios, Aix of Samos, Laodamas of Phocaea, and Histaios of Miletos, whose opinion had been proposed in opposition to that of Miltiades. And of the Aeolians, the only man of consequence there present was Aristagoras of Kyme. When these adopted the opinion of Histaios, they resolved to add to it deeds and words as follows, namely to break up that part of the bridge which was on the side towards the Scythians, to break it up, I say, for a distance equal to the range of an arrow, both in order that they might be thought to be doing something, though in fact they were doing nothing, and for fear that the Scythians might make an attempt using force and desiring to cross the Ister by the bridge. And in breaking up that part of the bridge which was towards Scythia, they resolved to say that they would do all that which the Scythians desired. This they added to the opinion proposed, and then Histaios coming forth from among them made answer to the Scythians as follows. Scythians, ye are come bringing good news, and it is a timely haste that ye make to bring it, and ye on your part give us good guidance, while we on ours render to you suitable service. For, as ye see, we are breaking up the passage, and we shall show all zeal in our desire to be free. And while we are breaking up the bridge, it is fitting that ye should be seeking for those of whom ye speak, and when ye have found them, that ye should take vengeance on them on behalf of us, as well as of yourselves in such manner as they deserve. The Scythians then, believing for the second time that the Ionians were speaking the truth, turned back to make search for the Persians, but they missed altogether their line of march through the land. Of this the Scythians themselves were the cause, since they had destroyed the pastures for horses in that region, and had choked up with earth the springs of water, for if they had not done this, it would have been possible for them easily, if they desired it, to discover the Persians. But as it was, by those things wherein they thought they had taken their measures best, they failed of success. The Scythians then on their part were passing through those regions of their own land where there was grass for the horses and springs of water, and were seeking for the enemy there, thinking that they too were taking a course in their retreat through such country as this, while the Persians in fact marched keeping carefully to the track which they had made before, and so they found the passage of the river, though with difficulty. And as they arrived by night and found the bridge broken up, they were brought to the extreme of fear, lest the Ionians should have deserted them. Now there was with Darius an Egyptian who had a voice louder than that of any other man on earth. And this man Darius ordered to take his stand upon the bank of the Ister, and to call Histaios of Miletus. He accordingly proceeded to do so, and Histaios, hearing the first hail, produced all the ships to carry the army over, and also put together the bridge. Thus the Persians escaped, and the Scythians in their search missed the Persians the second time also. And their judgment of the Ionians is that on the one hand, if they be regarded as free men, they are the most worthless and cowardly of all men, but on the other hand, if regarded as slaves, they are the most attached to their master, and the least disposed to run away of all slaves. This is the reproach which is cast against the Ionians by the Scythians. Darius then marching through Thrace arrived at Sestos in the Chersonese, and from that place, he passed over himself and his ships to Asia, but to command his army in Europe, he left Megabazos a Persian, to whom Darius once gave honor by uttering in the land of Persia this saying. Darius was beginning to eat pomegranates, and at once when he opened the first of them, Artabanos his brother asked him of what he would desire to have as many as there were seeds in the pomegranate. And Darius said that he would desire to have men like Megabazos as many as that in number, rather than to have Hellas subject to him. In Persia, I say, he honored him by saying these words, and at this time he left him in command with 8 myriads of his army. This Megabazos uttered one saying whereby he left of himself an imperishable memory with the peoples of Hellespont. For being once at Byzantium he heard that the men of Chalcedon had settled in that region 17 years before the Byzantines, and having heard it, he said that those of Chalcedon at that time chanced to be blind, for assuredly they would not have chosen the worse place, when they might have settled in that which was better, if they had not been blind. This Megabazos it was who was left in command at that time in the land of the Hellespontians, and he proceeded to subdue all who did not take the side of the Medes. He then was doing thus, and at this very same time a great expedition was being made also against Libya, on an occasion which I shall relate, when I have first related this which follows. The children of those who voyaged in the Argo, having been driven forth by those Pelasgians who carried away at Brorin the women of the Athenians having been driven forth, I say by these from Lemnos, had departed and sailed to Lacedaemon, and sitting down on Mount Aegetos, they kindled a fire. The Lacedaemonians seeing this sent a messenger to inquire who they were and from whence, and they answered the question of the messenger, saying that they were Minyaean children of heroes who sailed in the Argo, for these, they said, had put into Lemnos and propagated the race of which they sprang. The Lacedaemonians having heard the story of the descent of the Minyae, sent a second time, and asked for what purpose they had come into the country, and were causing a fire to blaze. They said that they had been cast out by the Pelasgians, and were come now to the land of their fathers, for most just it was that this should so be done, and they said that their request was to be permitted to dwell with these, having a share of civil rights, and a portion allotted to them of the land. And the Lacedaemonians were content to receive the Minyae upon the terms which they themselves desired, being most of all impelled to do this by the fact that the sons of Tyndareus were voyagers in the Argo. So having received the Minyae, they gave them a share of land and distributed them in the tribes, and they forthwith made marriages, and gave in marriage to others the women whom they brought with them from Lemnos. However, when no very long time had passed, the Minyae forthwith broke out into insolence, asking for a share of the royal power, and also doing other impious things. Therefore the Lacedaemonians resolved to put them to death, and having seized them they cast them into a prison. Now the Lacedaemonians put to death by night all those whom they put to death, but no man by day. When therefore they were just about to kill them, the wives of the Minyae, being native Spartans and daughters of the first citizens of Sparta, entreated to be allowed to enter the prison and come to speech every one with her own husband. And they let them pass in, not supposing that any craft would be practiced by them. They, however, when they had entered, delivered to their husbands all the garments which they were wearing, and themselves received those of their husbands. Thus the Minyae, having put on the women's clothes, went forth out of prison as women, and having escaped in this manner, they went again to Taygetos and sat down there. Now at this very same time Theras the son of Autesion, the son of Tisamenos, the son of Thersander, the son of Polynex, was preparing to set forth from Lacedaemon to found a settlement. This Theras, who was of the race of Cadmos, was mother's brother to the sons of Aristodemos, Eurysthenes and Procles, and while these sons were yet children, Theras as their guardian, held the royal power in Sparta. When however his nephews were grown and had taken the power into their hands, then Theras, being grieved that he should be ruled by others after he had tasted of rule himself, said that he would not remain in Lacedaemon, but would sail away to his kinsmen. Now there were in the island which is now called Thera, but formerly was called Callista, descendants of Mamblairos the son of Poicles, a Phoenician. For Cadmos the son of Agenor in his search for Europa, put into land at the island which is now called Thera, and, whether it was that the country pleased him when he had put to land, or whether he chose to do so for any other reason, he left in this island, besides other Phoenicians, Mamblairos also, of his own kinsmen. These occupied the island called Callista for 8 generations of men, before Theras came from Lacedaemon. To these then, I say, Theras was preparing to set forth, taking with him people from the tribes, and intending to settle together with those who have been mentioned, not with any design to drive them out, but on the contrary claiming them very strongly as kinfolk. And when the Minyae after having escaped from the prison went and sat down on Taygetos, Theras entreated of the Lacedaemonians, as they were proposing to put them to death, that no slaughter might take place, and at the same time he engaged himself to take them forth out of the land. The Lacedaemonians having agreed to this proposal, he sailed away with 330 oared galleys to the descendants of Mamblairos, not taking with him by any means all the Minyae, but a few only, for the greater number of them turned towards the land of the Peroratae and Caucones, and having driven these out of their country, they parted themselves into 6 divisions and founded in their territory the following towns: Leprion, Makistos, Phryxai, Pergos, Epion, Nudian. Of these the Eleans sacked the greater number within my own lifetime. The island meanwhile got its name of Thera after Theras who led the settlement. And since his son said that he would not sail with him, therefore he said that he would leave him behind as a sheep among wolves, and in accordance with that saying this young man got the name of Oiolikos, and it chanced that this name prevailed over his former name. Then from Oialikos was begotten Aegeus, after whom are called the Aegidai, a powerful clan in Sparta. And the men of this tribe, since their children did not live to grow up, established by the suggestion of an oracle a temple to the avenging deities of Laios and Oedipus, and after this the same thing was continued in Thera by the descendants of these men. Up to this point of the story the Lacedaemonians agree in their report with the men of Thera, but in what is to come, it is those of Thera alone who report that it happened as follows. Grinos the son of Asanios, a descendant of the Theras who has been mentioned, and king of the island of Thera, came to Delphi bringing the offering of a hecatomb from his state, and there were accompanying him, besides others of the citizens, also Batos the son of Polymnestos, who was by descent of the family of Euphemos of the race of the Minyai. Now when Grinos the king of the Theraeans was consulting the oracle about other matters, the Pythian prophetess gave answer bidding him found a city in Libya, and he made reply saying, Lord, I am by this time somewhat old and heavy to stir, but do thou bid some one of these younger ones do this. As he thus said he pointed towards Batos. So far at that time. But afterwards when he had come away they were in difficulty about the saying of the oracle, neither having any knowledge of Libya, in what part of the earth it was, nor venturing to send a colony to the unknown. Then after this for 7 years there was no rain in Thera, and in these years all the trees in their island were withered up excepting one. And when the Theraeans consulted the oracle, the Pythian prophetess alleged this matter of colonizing Libya to be the cause. As then they had no remedy for their evil, they sent messengers to Crete to find out whether any of the Cretans or of the sojourners in Crete had ever come to Libya. These as they wandered round about the country came also the city of Etanos, and there they met with a fisher for purple named Charobios, who said that he had been carried away by winds and had come to Libya, and in Libya to the island of Plataea. This man they persuaded by payment of money and took him to Thera, and from Thera there set sail men to explore, at first not many in number, and Charobios having guided them to this same island of Plataea, they left Charobios there, leaving behind with him provisions for a certain number of months, and sailed themselves as quickly as possible to make report about the island to the men of Thera. Since however these stayed away longer than the time appointed, Charobios found himself destitute, and after this a ship of Samos, of which the master was Kaleos, while sailing to Egypt, was carried out of its course and came to this island of Plataea, and the Samians hearing from Charobios the whole story left him provisions for a year. They themselves then put out to sea from the island and sailed on, endeavoring to reach Egypt, but carried away continually by the east wind, and as the wind did not cease to blow, they passed through the pillars of Heracles and came to Tartessos, guided by divine providence. Now this trading place was at that time untouched by any, so that when these returned back home, they made profit from their cargo greater than any other Hellenes, of whom we have certain knowledge, with the exception at least of Sostratos the son of Laodamas the Aeginetan, for with him, it is not possible for any other man to contend. And the Samians set apart 6 talents, the 10th part of their gains, and had a bronze vessel made like an argolic mixing bowl with rounded heads of griffins projecting in a row, and this they dedicated as an offering in the temple of Hera, setting as supports under it 3 colossal statues of bronze 7 cubits in height, resting upon their knees. By reason first of this deed great friendship was formed by those of Cyrene and Thera with the Samians. The Therians meanwhile, when they arrived at Thera after having left Corobios in the island, reported that they had colonized an island on the coast of Libya. And the men of Thera resolved to send one of every 2 brothers selected by lot and men, besides taken from all the regions of the island, which are 7 in number, and further that Batos should be both their leader and their king. Thus then they sent forth 250 oared galleys to Plataea. This is the report of the Therians, and for the remainder of the account from this point onwards, the Therians are in agreement with the men of Cyrene. From this point onwards, I say, since in what concerns Batos the Cyrenians tell by no means the same tale as those of Thera, for their account is this. There is in Crete a city called Oxos in which one Eteirchos became king, who when he had a daughter, whose mother was dead, named Phronum, took to wife another woman notwithstanding. She having come in afterwards, thought fit to be a stepmother to Phronum in deed as well as in name, giving her evil treatment and devising everything possible to her hurt. And at last she brings against her a charge of lewdness, and persuades her husband that the truth is so. He then being convinced by his wife, devised an unholy deed against a daughter. For there was in Oxos one Themison, a merchant of Thera, whom Eteirchos took to himself as a guest friend, and caused him to swear that he would surely serve him in whatsoever he should require. And when he had caused him to swear this, he brought and delivered to him his daughter, and bade him take her away and cast her into the sea. Themison then was very greatly vexed at the deceit practiced in the matter of the oath, and he dissolved his guest friendship and did as follows, that is to say, he received the girl and sailed away, and when he got out into the open sea, to free himself from blame as regards the oath which Eteirchos had made him swear, he tied her on each side with ropes, and let her down into the sea, and then drew her up and came to Thera. After that, Polymnestos, a man of repute among the Therians, received Phronum from him and kept her as his concubine. And in course of time there was born to him from her a son with an impediment in his voice and lisping, to whom, as both Therians and Cyrenians say, was given the name Batos, but I think that some other name was then given, and he was named Batos instead of this after he came to Libya, taking for himself this surname from the oracle which was given to him at Delphi, and from the rank which he had obtained. For the Libyans call a king Batos. And for this reason, I think, the Pythian prophetess in her prophesying called him so, using the Libyan tongue, because she knew that he would be a king in Libya. For when he had grown to be a man, he came to Delphi to inquire about his voice, and when he asked, the prophetess thus answered him. For a voice thou camest, O Batos, but the Lord Phobos Apollo sendeth as settler forth to the Libyan land sheep abounding, just as if she should say using the Hellenic tongue, for a voice thou camest, O king. He thus made answer, Lord, I came to thee to inquire concerning my voice, but thou answerest me other things which are not possible, bidding me go as a settler to Libya, but with what power, or with what force of men should I go? Thus saying he did not at all persuade her to give him any other reply, and as she was prophesying to him again the same things as before, Batos departed while she was yet speaking, and went away to Thera. After this there came evil fortune both to himself and to the other men of Thera, and the Therians, not understanding that which befell them, sent to Delphi to inquire about the evils which they were suffering. And the Pythian prophetess gave them reply that if they joined with Batos in founding Cyrene in Libya, they would fare the better. After this the Therians sent Batos with 250-oared galleys, and these sailed to Libya, and then came away back to Thera, for they did not know what else to do. And the Therians pelted them with missiles when they endeavored to land, and would not allow them to put to shore, but bade them sail back again. They accordingly, being compelled, sailed away back, and they made a settlement in an island lying near the coast of Libya, called, as was said before, Plataea. This island is said to be of the same size as the now existing city of Cyrene. In this they continued to dwell 2 years, but as they had no prosperity, they left one of their number behind, and all the rest sailed away to Delphi, and having come to the oracle they consulted it, saying that they were dwelling in Libya, and that, though they were dwelling there, they fared none the better. And the Pythian prophetess made answer to them thus: Better than I, if thou knowest the Libyan land sheep abounding. Not having been there than I who have been, at thy wisdom I wonder. Having heard this, Batos and his companions sailed away back again, for in fact the god would not let them off from the task of settlement, till they had come to Libya itself. And having arrived at the island and taken up him whom they had left, they made a settlement in Libya itself at a spot opposite the island, called Azarus, which is enclosed by most fair woods on both sides, and a river flows by it on one side. In this spot they dwelt for 6 years, and in the 7th year the Libyans persuaded them to leave it, making request, and saying that they would conduct them to a better region. So the Libyans led them from that place, making them start towards evening, and in order that the Hellenes might not see the fairest of all the regions as they passed through it, they led them past it by night, having calculated the time of daylight. And this region is called Arasa. Then, having conducted them to the so-called spring of Apollo, they said, Hellenes, here is a fit place for you to dwell, for here the heaven is pierced with holes. Now during the lifetime of the first settler Batos, who reigned 40 years, and of his son Arcesilaus, who reigned 16 years, the Cyrenians continued to dwell there with the same number as when they first set forth to the colony. But in the time of the third king, called Batos the Prosperous, the Pythian prophetess gave an oracle wherein she urged the Hellenes in general to sail and join with the Cyrenians in colonizing Libya. For the Cyrenians invited them, giving promise of a division of land, and the oracle which she uttered was as follows: Who to the land much desired, to Libya, afterwards cometh, after the land be divided, I say he shall some day repent it. Then great numbers were gathered at Cyrene, and the Libyans who dwelt round had much land cut off from their possessions. Therefore they with their king, whose name was Atticron, as they were not only deprived of their country, but also were dealt with very insolently by the Cyrenians, sent to Egypt and delivered themselves over to Apries king of Egypt. He then, having gathered a great army of Egyptians, sent it against Cyrene, and the men of Cyrene marched out to the region of Arasa, and to the spring east, and there both joined battle with the Egyptians and defeated them in the battle. For since the Egyptians had not before made trial of the Hellenes in fight and therefore despised them, they were so slaughtered that but few of them returned back to Egypt. In consequence of this, and because they laid the blame of it upon Apries, the Egyptians revolted from him. This Batos had a son called Arcesilaus, who first, when he became king, made a quarrel with his own brothers, until they finally departed to another region of Libya, and making the venture for themselves founded that city which was then and is now called Barca. And at the same time as they founded this, they induced the Libyans to revolt from the Kyrenians. After this, Arcesilaus made an expedition against those Libyans who had received them and who had also revolted from Cyrene, and the Libyans fearing him departed and fled towards the eastern tribes of Libyans. And Arcesilaus followed after them as they fled, until he arrived in his pursuit at Lucan in Libya, and there the Libyans resolved to attack him. Accordingly they engaged battle and defeated the Kyrenians so utterly that 7,000 hoplites of the Kyrenians fell there. After this disaster Arcesilaus, being sick and having swallowed a potion, was strangled by his brother Haliarchos, and Haliarchos was killed treacherously by the wife of Arcesilaus, whose name was Eryxo. Then Batos the son of Arcesilaus succeeded to the kingdom, who was lame and not sound in his feet. And the Kyrenians, with a view to the misfortune which had befallen them, sent men to Delphi to ask what form of rule they should adopt, in order to live in the best way possible. And the Pythian prophetess bade them take to themselves a reformer of their state from Mantinia of the Arcadians. The men of Cyrene accordingly made request, and those of Mantinia gave them the man of most repute among their citizens, whose name was Demonax. This man therefore, having come to Cyrene and having ascertained all things exactly, in the first place caused them to have 3 tribes, distributing them thus. 1 division he made of the Theraeans and their dependents, another of the Peloponnesians and Cretans, and a third of all the islanders. Then secondly for the king Batos, he set apart domains of land and priesthoods, but all the other powers which the kings used to possess before, he assigned as of public right to the people. During the reign of this Batos things continued to be thus, but in the reign of his son Arcesilaus, there arose much disturbance about the offices of the state. For Arcesilaus son of Batos the lame man of Phaertime said that he would not suffer it to be according as the Mantinian Demonax had arranged, but asked to have back the royal rights of his forefathers. After this, stirring up strife, he was worsted and went as an exile to Samos, and his mother to Salamis in Cyprus. Now at that time the ruler of Salamis was Euelthan, the same who dedicated as an offering the censer at Delphi, a work well worth seeing, which is placed in the treasury of the Corinthians. To him having come, Phaertime asked him for an army to restore herself and her son to Cyrene. Euelthan however was ready to give her anything else rather than that, and she, when she received that which he gave her, said that this too was a fair gift, but fairer still would be that other gift of an army for which he was asking. As she kept saying this to everything which was given, at last Euelthan sent out to her a present of a golden spindle and distaff, with wool also upon it. And when Phaertime uttered again the same saying about this present, Euelthan said that such things as this were given as gifts to women and not an army. Arcesilaus meanwhile, being in Samos, was gathering every one together by a promise of dividing land, and while a great host was being collected, Arcesilaus set out to Delphi to inquire of the oracle about returning from exile. And the Pythian prophetess gave him this answer. For 4 named Batos and 4 named Arcesilaus, 8 generations of men, Loxias grants to you to be kings of Cyrene. But beyond this he counsels you not even to attempt it. Thou however must keep quiet when thou hast come back to thy land, and if thou findest a furnace full of jars, heat not the jars fiercely, but let them go with a fair wind. If however thou heat the furnace fiercely, enter not thou into the place flowed round by water, for if thou dost thou shalt die, both thou and the bull which is fairer than all the rest. Thus the Pythian prophetess gave answer to Arcesilaus, and he, having taken to him those in Samos, made his return to Cyrene, and when he had got possession of the power, he did not remember the saying of the oracle, but endeavored to exact penalties from those of the opposite faction for having driven him out. Of these some escaped out of the country altogether, but some Arcesilaus got into his power and sent them away to Cyprus to be put to death. These were driven out of their course to Cnidos, and the men of Cnidos rescued them and sent them away to Thera. Some others, however, of the Cyrenians fled to a great tower belonging to Aglamachos, a private citizen, and Arcesilaus burned them by piling up brushwood round. Then after he had done the deed he perceived that the oracle meant this, in that the Pythian prophetess forbade him, if he found the jars in the furnace, to heat them fiercely, and he voluntarily kept away from the city of the Cyrenians, fearing the death which had been prophesied by the oracle and supposing that Cyrene was flowed round by water. Now he had to wife a kinswoman of his own, the daughter of the king of Barca, whose name was Alazar. To him he came, and men of Barca together with certain of the exiles from Cyrene, perceiving him going about in the marketplace, killed him, and also besides him his father-in-law Alazar. Arcesilaus accordingly, having missed the meaning of the oracle, whether with his will or against his will, fulfilled his own destiny. His mother Phaertime meanwhile, so long as Arcesilaus, having worked evil for himself, dwelt at Barca, herself held the royal power of her son at Cyrene, both exercising his other rights and also sitting in council. But when she heard that her son had been slain in Barca, she departed and fled to Egypt. For she had on her side services done for Cambyses the son of Cyrus by Arcesilaus. Since this was the Arcesilaus who had given over Cyrene to Cambyses, and had laid a tribute upon himself. Phaertime then, having come to Egypt, sat down as a suppliant of Arians, bidding him help her, and alleging as a reason that it was on account of his inclination to the side of the Medes that her son had been slain. Now this Arians had been appointed ruler of the province of Egypt by Cambyses, and after the time of these events he lost his life because he would measure himself with Darius. For having heard and seen that Darius desired to leave behind him as a memorial of himself a thing which had not been made by any other king, he imitated him, until at last he received his reward. For whereas Darius refined gold and made it as pure as possible, and of this caused coins to be struck, Arians, being ruler of Egypt, did the same thing with silver, and even now the purest silver is that which is called Ariandic. Darius then, having learnt that he was doing this, put him to death, bringing against him another charge of attempting rebellion. Now at the time of which I speak this Arians had compassion on Phaertime, and gave her all the troops that were in Egypt, both the land and the sea forces, appointing Amasis a Marathian to command the land army and Batters, of the race of the Pasargadae, to command the fleet. But before he sent away the army, Arians dispatched a herald to Barca and asked who it was who had killed Arcesilaus, and the men of Barca all took it upon themselves, for they said they suffered formerly many great evils at his hands. Having heard this, Arians at last sent away the army together with Phaertime. This charge then was the pretext alleged, but in fact the army was being sent out, as I believe, for the purpose of subduing Libya. For of the Libyans there are many nations of various kinds, and but few of them are subject to the king, while the greater number paid no regard to Darius. Now the Libyans have their dwelling as follows. Beginning from Egypt, first of the Libyans are settled the Atarmachidite, who practice for the most part the same customs as the Egyptians, but wear clothing similar to that of the other Libyans. Their women wear a bronze ring upon each leg, and they have long hair on their heads, and when they catch their lice, each one bites her own in retaliation, and then throws them away. These are the only people of the Libyans who do this, and they alone display to the king their maidens when they are about to be married, and whosoever of them proves to be pleasing to the king is deflowered by him. These Atarmachidae extend along the coast from Egypt as far as the port which is called Plynos. Next after these come the Galligamai, occupying the country towards the west as far as the island of Aphrodisias. In the space within this limit lies off the coast the island of Plataea, where the Cyrenians made their settlement, and on the coast of the mainland, there is Port Menelaus and Azorus, where the Cyrenians used to dwell. From this point begins the Sylphian, and it extends along the coast from the island of Plataea as far as the entrance of the Syrtis. This nation practices customs nearly resembling those of the rest. Next to the Galligamai on the west are the Asbestai. These dwell above Cyrene, and the Asbestai do not reach down the sea, for the region along the sea is occupied by Cyrenians. These most of all the Libyans are drivers of 4-horse chariots, and in the greater number of their customs, they endeavor to imitate the Cyrenians. Next after the Asbestai on the west come the Auchusai. These dwell above Barca and reach down to the sea by Euesperides. And in the middle of the country of the Auchusai dwell the Baccales, a small tribe, who reach down to the sea by the city of Tauchera in the territory of Barca. These practice the same customs as those above Cyrene. Next after these Auchusai towards the west come the Nasamonians, a numerous race, who in the summer leave their flocks behind by the sea, and go up to the region of Augila, to gather the fruit of the date palms, which grow in great numbers and very large, and are all fruit-bearing. These hunt the wingless locusts, and they dry them in the sun and then pound them up, and after that they sprinkle them upon milk and drink them. Their custom is for each man to have many wives, and they make their intercourse with them common in nearly the same manner as the Massagetae, that is, they set up a staff in front of the door, and so have intercourse. When an Asamonean man marries his first wife, the custom is for the bride on the first night to go through the whole number of the guests having intercourse with them, and each man when he has lain with her gives a gift, whatsoever he has brought with him from his house. The forms of oath and of divination which they use are as follows. They swear by the men among themselves who are reported to have been the most righteous and brave, by these, I say, laying hands upon their tombs, and they divine by visiting the sepulchral mounds of their ancestors, and lying down to sleep upon them after having prayed, and whatsoever thing the man sees in his dream, this he accepts. They practice also the exchange of pledges in the following manner, that is to say, one gives the other to drink from his hand, and drinks himself from the hand of the other, and if they have no liquid, they take of the dust from the ground and lick it. Adjoining the Nasamonians is the country of the Siloi. These have perished utterly in the following manner. The south wind blowing upon them dried up all their cisterns of water, and their land was waterless, lying all within the Syrtis. They then, having taken a resolve by common consent, marched in arms against the south wind. I report that which is reported by the Libyans, and when they had arrived at the sandy tract, the south wind blew and buried them in the sand. These then having utterly perished, the Nasamonians from that time forward possessed their land. Above these towards the south wind in the region of wild beasts dwell the Garamantians, who fly from every man and avoid the company of all, and they neither possess any weapon of war, nor know how to defend themselves against enemies. These dwell above the Nasamonians, and next to the Nasamonians along the sea coast towards the west come the Maccai, who shave their hair so as to leave tufts, letting the middle of their hair grow long, but round this on all sides, shaving it close to the skin, and for fighting they carry shields made of ostrich skins. Through their land the river Kinops runs out into the sea, flowing from a hill called the Hill of the Charites. This hill of the Charites is overgrown thickly with wood, while the rest of Libya, which has been spoken of before, is bare of trees, and the distance from the sea to this hill is 200 furlongs. Next to these Maccai are the Gindanes, whose women wear each of them a number of anklets made of the skins of animals, for the following reason, as it is said, "For every man who has commerce with her she binds on an anklet, and the woman who has most is esteemed the best, since she has been loved by the greatest number of men." In a peninsula which stands out into the sea from the land of these Gindanes dwell the Latophagoi, who live by eating the fruit of the lotos only. Now the fruit of the lotos is in size like that of the mastich tree, and in flavor, it resembles that of the date palm. Of this fruit the Latophagoi even make for themselves wine. Next after the Latophagoi along the sea coast are the Macleans, who also make use of the lotos, but less than those above mentioned. These extend to a great river named the River Triton, and this runs out into a great lake called Tritonus, in which there is an island named Phla. About this island they say there was an oracle given to the Lacedaemonians that they should make a settlement in it. The following moreover is also told, namely that Jason, when the Argo had been completed by him under Mount Pelion, put into it a hecatomb, and with it also a tripod of bronze, and sailed round Peloponnese, desiring to come to Delphi, and when in sailing he got near Malea, a north wind seized his ship and carried it off to Libya, and before he caught sight of land, he had come to be in the shoals of the lake Tritonus. Then as he was at a loss how he should bring his ship forth, the story goes that Triton appeared to him and bade Jason give him the tripod, saying that he would show them the right course, and let them go away without hurt. And when Jason consented to it, then Triton showed them the passage out between the shoals and set the tripod in his own temple. After having first uttered a prophecy over the tripod and having declared to Jason and his company the whole matter, namely that whensoever one of the descendants of those who sailed with him in the Argo should carry away this tripod, then it was determined by fate that 100 cities of Hellenes should be established about the lake Tritonus. Having heard this, the native Libyans concealed the tripod. Next to these Macleans are the Ossians. These and the Macleans dwell round the lake Tritonus, and the river Triton is the boundary between them. And while the Macleans grow their hair long at the back of the head, the Ossians do so in front. At a yearly festival of Athene their maidens take their stand in two parties and fight against one another with stones and staves, and they say that in doing so, they are fulfilling the rites handed down by their fathers for the divinity who was sprung from that land, whom we call Athene. And those of the maidens who die of the wounds received they call false maidens. But before they let them begin the fight they do this. All join together and equip the maiden who is judged to be the fairest on each occasion, with a Corinthian helmet and with full Hellenic armor, and then causing her to go up into a chariot they conduct her round the lake. Now I cannot tell with what they equipped the maidens in old time, before the Hellenes were settled near them, but I suppose that they used to be equipped with Egyptian armor, for it is from Egypt that both the shield and the helmet have come to the Hellenes, as I affirm. They say moreover that Athene is the daughter of Poseidon and of the lake Tritonus, and that she had some cause of complaint against her father, and therefore gave herself to Zeus, and Zeus made her his own daughter. Such is the story which these tell, and they have their intercourse with women in common, not marrying but having intercourse like cattle. And when the child of any woman has grown big, he is brought before a meeting of the men held within 3 months of that time, and whomsoever of the men the child resembles, his son he is accounted to be. Thus then have been mentioned those nomad Libyans who live along the sea coast. And above these inland is the region of Libya which has wild beasts, and above the wild beast region there stretches a raised belt of sand, extending from Thebes of the Egyptians to the Pillars of Heracles. In this belt at intervals of about 10 days' journey, there are fragments of salt in great lumps forming hills, and at the top of each hill there shoots up from the middle of the salt a spring of water cold and sweet, and about the spring well-men, at the furthest limit towards the desert, and above the wild beast region. First, at a distance of 10 days' journey from Thebes, are the Ammonians, whose temple is derived from that of the Theban Zeus, for the image of Zeus in Thebes also, as I have said before, has the head of a ram. These, as it chances, have also other water of a spring, which in the early morning is warm, at the time when the market fills, cooler, when midday comes, it is quite cold, and then they water their gardens, but as the day declines, it abates from its coldness, until at last, when the sun sets, the water is warm, and it continues to increase in heat still more until it reaches midnight, when it boils and throws up bubbles, and when midnight passes, it becomes cooler gradually till dawn of day. This spring is called the fountain of the sun. After the Ammonians, as you go on along the belt of sand, at an interval again of 10 days' journey, there is a hill of salt like that of the Ammonians, and a spring of water, with men dwelling about it, and the name of this place is Argila. To this the Nasamonians come year by year to gather the fruit of the date palms. From Argila at a distance again of 10 days' journey, there is another hill of salt and spring of water, and a great number of fruit-bearing date palms, as there are also in the other places. And men dwell here who are called the Garmantians, a very great nation, who carry earth to lay over the salt, and then sow crops. From this point is the shortest way to the Latophagoi, for from these it is a journey of 30 days to the country of the Garmantians. Among them also are produced the cattle which feed backwards, and they feed backwards for this reason, because they have their horns bent down forwards, and therefore they walk backwards as they feed, for forwards they cannot go, because the horns run into the ground in front of them, but in nothing else do they differ from other cattle except in this, and in the thickness and firmness to the touch of their hide. These Garamantians of whom I speak hunt the cave-dwelling Ethiopians with their 4-horse chariots, for the cave-dwelling Ethiopians are the swiftest of foot of all men about whom we hear report made. And the cave-dwellers feed upon serpents and lizards and such creeping things, and they use a language which resembles no other, for in it, they squeak just like bats. From the Garmantians at a distance again of 10 days' journey there is another hill of salt and spring of water, and men dwell round it called Adarantians, who alone of all men about whom we know are nameless, For while all taken together have the name Adarantians, each separate man of them has no name given to him. These utter curses against the sun when he is at his height, and moreover revile him with all manner of foul terms, because he oppresses them by his burning heat, both themselves and their land. After this, at a distance of 10 days' journey, there is another hill of salt and spring of water, and men dwell round it. Near this salt hill is a mountain named Atlas, which is small in circuit and rounded on every side, and so exceedingly lofty is it said to be, that it is not possible to see its summits, for clouds never leave them either in the summer or in the winter. This the natives say is the pillar of the heaven. After this mountain these men got their name, for they are called Atlanteans, and it is said that they neither eat anything that has life nor have any dreams. As far as these Atlanteans I am able to mention in order the names of those who are settled in the belt of sand, but for the parts beyond these I can do so no more. However, the belt extends as far as the pillars of Heracles, and also in the parts outside them. And there is a mine of salt in it at a distance of 10 days' journey from the Atlanteans, and men dwelling there, and these all have their houses built of the lumps of salt, since these parts of Libya which we have now reached are without rain, for if it rained, the walls being made of salt would not be able to last. And the salt is dug up there both white and purple in color. Above the sand belt, in the parts which are in the direction of the south wind and towards the interior of Libya, the country is uninhabited, without water and without wild beasts, rainless and treeless, and there is no trace of moisture in it. I have said that from Egypt as far as the Lake Tritonus Libyans dwell who are nomads, eating flesh and drinking milk, and these do not taste at all of the flesh of cows, for the same reason as the Egyptians also abstain from it, nor do they keep swine. Moreover, the women of the Cyrenians too think it not right to eat cow's flesh, because of the Egyptian Isis, and they even keep fasts and celebrate festivals for her, and the women of Barca, in addition from cow's flesh, do not taste of swine either. Thus it is with these matters. But in the region to the west of Lake Tritonus, the Libyans cease to be nomads, and they do not practice the same customs, nor do to their children anything like that which the nomads are wont to do. For the nomad Libyans, whether all of them I cannot say for certain, but many of them, do as follows. When their children are 4 years old, they burn with a greasy piece of sheep's wool the veins in the crowns of their heads, and some of them burn the veins of the temples, so that for all their lives to come, the cold humor may not run down from their heads and do them hurt. And for this reason it is, they say, that they are so healthy, for the Libyans are in truth the most healthy of all races concerning which we have knowledge. Whether for this reason or not I cannot say for certain, but the most healthy they certainly are. And if, when they burn the children, a convulsion comes on, they have found out a remedy for this, for they pour upon them the water of a he-goat, and so save them. I report that which is reported by the Libyans themselves. The following is the manner of sacrifice which the nomads have. They cut off a part of the animal's ear as a first offering and throw it over the house, and having done this they twist its neck. They sacrifice only to the sun and the moon, that is to say, to these all the Libyans sacrifice, but those who dwell round the Lake Tritonus sacrifice most of all to Athene, and next to Triton and Poseidon. It would appear also that the Hellenes made the dress and the aegis of the images of Athene, after the model of the Libyan women, for except that the dress of the Libyan women is of leather, and the tassels which hang from their aegis are not formed of serpents, but of leather thongs. In all other respects, Athene is dressed like them. Moreover, the name too declares that the dress of the figures of Pallas has come from Libya, for the Libyan women wear over their other garments bare goat skins, aegeas, with tasseled fringes and colored over with red matter, and from the name of these goat skins, the Hellenes formed the name Aegis. I think also that in these regions first arose the practice of crying aloud during the performance of sacred rites, for the Libyan women do this very well. The Hellenes learned from the Libyans also the yawking together of 4 horses. The nomads buried those who died just in the same manner as the Hellenes, except only the Nasamonians. These bury bodies in a sitting posture, taking care at the moment when the man expires to place him sitting, and not to let him die lying down on his back. They have dwellings composed of the stems of asphodel entwined with rushes, and so made that they can be carried about. Such are the customs followed by these tribes. On the west of the river Triton next after the Ausians come Libyans who are tillers of the soil, and whose custom it is to possess fixed habitations, and they are called Maxians. They grow their hair long on the right side of their heads and cut it short upon the left, and smear their bodies over with red ochre. These say that they are of the men who came from Troy. This country and the rest of Libya, which is towards the west, is both much more frequented by wild beasts and much more thickly wooded than the country of the nomads. For whereas the part of Libya which is situated towards the east, where the nomads dwell, is low-lying and sandy up to the river Triton, that which succeeds it towards the west, the country of those who till the soil, is exceedingly mountainous and thickly wooded and full of wild beasts. For in the land of these are found both the monstrous serpent and the lion and the elephant, and bears and venomous snakes and horned asses, besides the dog-headed men, and the headless men with their eyes set in their breasts, at least so say the Libyans about them, and the wild men and wild women, and a great multitude of other beasts, which are not fabulous like these. In the land of the nomads, however, there exist none of these, but other animals as follows: white rump antelopes, gazelles, buffaloes, asses, not the horned kind, but others which go without water, for in fact these never drink, ories, whose horns are made into the sides of the Phoenician lyre. This animal is in size about equal to an ox, small foxes, hyenas, porcupines, wild rams, wolves, jackals, panthers, bories. Land crocodiles about 3 cubits in length and very much resembling lizards, ostriches, and small snakes, each with 1 horn. These wild animals there are in this country, as well as those which exist elsewhere, except the stag and the wild boar. But Libya has no stags nor wild boars at all. Also there are in this country 3 kinds of mice. One is called the 2-legged mouse, another the zegerus, a name which is Libyan and signifies in the Hellenic tongue a hill, and a third the prickly mouse. There are also weasels produced in the Sylphian, which are very like those of Tartessos. Such are the wild animals which the land of the Libyans possesses, so far as we were able to discover by inquiries extended as much as possible. Next to the Maxian Libyans are the Zoikes, whose women drive their chariots for them to war. Next to these are the Jazantes, among whom honey is made in great quantity by bees, but in much greater quantity still it is said to be made by men, who work at it as a trade. However that may be, these all smear themselves over with red ochre and eat monkeys, which are produced in very great numbers upon their mountains. Opposite these, as the Carthaginians say, there lies an island called Kairos, 200 furlongs in length but narrow, to which one may walk over from the mainland, and it is full of olives and vines. In it they say there is a pool, from which the native girls with birds' feathers smeared over with pitch bring up gold dust out of the mud. Whether this is really so I do not know, but I write that which is reported, and nothing is impossible, for even in Zakynthos I saw myself pitch brought up out of a pool of water. There are there several pools, and the largest of them measures 70 feet each way, and is 2 fathoms in depth. Into this they plunge a pole with a myrtle branch bound to it, and then with the branch of the myrtle they bring up pitch, which has the smell of asphalt, but in other respects, it is superior to the pitch of Pieria. This they pour into a pit dug near the pool, and when they have collected a large quantity, then they pour it into the jars from the pit. And whatever thing falls into the pool goes underground and reappears in the sea, which is distant about 4 furlongs from the pool. Thus then the report about the island lying near the coast of Libya is also probably enough true. The Carthaginians say also this, namely that there is a place in Libya and men dwelling there, outside the pillars of Heracles, to whom when they have come and have taken the merchandise forth from their ships, they set it in order along the beach, and embark again in their ships, and after that they raise a smoke, and the natives of the country seeing the smoke come to the sea. And then they lay down gold as an equivalent for the merchandise, and retire to a distance away from the merchandise. The Carthaginians upon that disembark and examine it, and if the gold is in their opinion sufficient for the value of the merchandise, they take it up and go their way, but if not, they embark again in their ships and sit there, and the others approach and straightway add more gold to the former, until they satisfy them. And they say that neither party wrongs the other, for neither do the Carthaginians lay hands on the gold until it is made equal to the value of their merchandise, nor do the others lay hands on the merchandise until the Carthaginians have taken the gold. These are the Libyan tribes whom we are able to name, and of these the greater number neither now pay any regard to the king of the Medes, nor did they then. Thus much also I have to say about this land, namely that it is occupied by 4 races and no more, so far as we know, and of these races, 2 are natives of the soil and the other 2 not so, for the Libyans and the Ethiopians are natives, the one race dwelling in the northern parts of Libya and the other in the southern, while the Phoenicians and the Hellenes are strangers. I think moreover that, besides other things, in goodness of soil Libya does not very greatly excel as compared with Asia or Europe, except only the region of Kinops, for the same name is given to the land as to the river. This region is equal to the best of lands in bringing forth the fruit of Demeter, nor does it at all resemble the rest of Libya, for it has black soil and is watered by springs, and neither has it fear of drought, nor is it hurt by drinking too abundantly of rain, for rain there is in this part of Libya. Of the produce of the crops the same measures hold good here as for the Babylonian land. And that is good land also which the Euesperites occupy, for when it bears best it produces 100-fold, but the land in the region of Kinops produces sometimes as much as 300-fold. Moreover the land of Cyrene, which is the highest land of the part of Libya which is occupied by nomads, has within its confines 3 seasons of harvest, at which we may marvel. For the parts by the sea coasts first have their fruits ripe for reaping, and for gathering the vintage, and when these have been gathered in, the parts which lie above the seaside places, those situated in the middle, which they call the hills, are ripe for the gathering in, and as soon as this middle crop has been gathered in, that in the highest part of the land comes to perfection and is ripe, so that by the time the first crop has been eaten and drunk up, the last is just coming in. Thus the harvest for the Carenians lasts 8 months. Let so much as has been said suffice for these things. Now when the Persian helpers of Feartime, having been sent from Egypt by Aryans, had arrived at Barca, they laid siege to the city, proposing to the inhabitants that they should give up those who were guilty of the murder of Archesilaus. But as all their people had taken a share in the guilt, they did not accept the proposals. Then they besieged Barca for 9 months, both digging underground passages which led to the wall, and making vigorous attacks upon it. Now the passages dug were discovered by a worker of bronze with a shield covered over with bronze, who had thought of a plan as follows. Carrying it round within the wall, he applied it to the ground in the city, and whereas the other places to which he applied it were noiseless, at those places where digging was going on, the bronze of the shield gave a sound, and the men of Barca would make a countermine there and slay the Persians who were digging mines. This then was discovered as I have said, and the attacks were repulsed by the men of Barca. Then as they were suffering hardship for a long time and many were falling on both sides, and especially on that of the Persians, Amasis the commander of the land army contrived as follows. Perceiving that the Barcaeans were not to be conquered by force, but might be conquered by guile, he dug by night a broad trench, and over it he laid timber of no great strength, and brought earth and laid it above on the top of the timber, making it level with the rest of the ground. Then at daybreak he invited the men of Barca to a parley, and they gladly consented, and at last they agreed to make a treaty. And the treaty they made with one another was taken over the hidden trench, namely that so long as this earth should continue to be as it was, so long the oath should remain firm, and that the men of Barca should promise to pay tribute of due amount to the king, and the Persians should do no further violence to the men of Barca. After the oath, the men of Barca, trusting to these engagements, both went forth themselves from their city, and let any who desired it of the enemy pass within their walls, having opened all the gates. But the Persians first broke down the concealed bridge, and then began to run inside the city wall. And the reason why they broke down the bridge which they had made was that they might keep their oaths, since they had sworn to the men of Barca that the oath should remain firm continually for so long time as the earth should remain as it then was, but after that they had broken it down, the oath no longer remained firm. Now the most guilty of the Barcaeans, when they were delivered to her by the Persians, Feartime impaled in a ring round about the wall, and she cut off the breasts of their wives, and set the wall round with these also in order. But the rest of the men of Barca she bade the Persians carry off as spoil, except so many of them as were of the house of Bados and not sharers in the guilt of the murder, and to these Feartime gave the city in charge. So the Persians, having made slaves of the rest of the Barcaeans, departed to go back. And when they appeared at the gates of the city of Cyrene, the Carenians let them go through their town, in order to avoid neglect of some oracle. Then as the army was going through, Batters the commander of the fleet urged that they should capture the city, but Amasis the commander of the land army would not consent to it, for he said that they had been sent against no other city of the Hellenes except Barca. When however they had passed through and were encamping on the hill of Zeus Lycaos, they repented of not having taken possession of Cyrene, and they endeavored again to pass into it, but the men of Cyrene would not allow them. Then upon the Persians, although no one fought against them, there fell a sudden panic, and they ran away for about 60 furlongs and then encamped. And when the camp had been placed here, there came to it a messenger from Arians summoning them back. So the Persians asked the Cyrenians to give them provisions for their march, and obtained their request, and having received these, they departed to go to Egypt. After this the Libyans took them up, and killed for the sake of their clothes and equipment, those of them who at any time were left or straggled behind, until at last they came to Egypt. This army of the Persians reached Eusperides, and this was their furthest point in Libya. And those of the Barcaeans whom they had reduced to slavery they removed again from Egypt and brought them to the king, and King Darius gave them a village in the land of Bactria, in which to make a settlement. To this village they gave the name of Barca, and it still continued to be inhabited by them even down to my own time, in the land of Bactria. Phaertime, however, did not bring her life happily to an end any more than they. For as soon as she had returned from Libya to Egypt after having avenged herself on the Barcaeans, she died an evil death, having become suddenly full of worms while yet alive. For, as it seems, too severe punishments inflicted by men proved displeasing to the gods. Such and so great was the punishment inflicted by Phaertime the wife of Batos on the men of Barca. And that's not all. Our experts and regular viewers respond to all comments. Also check if you forgot to subscribe and set your bell to receive notifications about new audiobooks and other useful self-development materials that we release regularly. Join in the discussions, don't forget to give likes and, if possible and inspired, support the development of the channel financially. All useful links will be in the description and the first attached comment. Goodness, love and wisdom to all. And now move on to watch the next part of the video at the links below, or choose something from the playlists of the channel and those you see on the screen.